I'm Corey Cohen. I'm from VCF. We want to thank you for coming to the show. And right now it's going to be kind of a panel. It's our first panel this weekend. All this stuff will be recorded and on YouTube because obviously a lot of people couldn't come. So I'll just leave it there and let these guys introduce themselves. But I see Dan has a mirror with him, so it could get interesting.
All right, well, thanks. Thanks for invitation. VCF event is great. It's actually my first VCF event. So thanks for sticking with us and staying until the very end of the day. So we're going to talk about WalkMax. No, it's not a typo. We're not going to talk about Sony Walkmans. We're going to talk about WalkMax. And hopefully many of you have seen our booth. It's right around the corner here. I'd like to acknowledge my two co-panelists here, Mike and Dan. Many of you know Dan. Mike is one of my companions in crimes in this project. Also, I'd like to acknowledge my friend Boris over there, who was part of this project over the last year or so. And then Steph, the last of the 5 musketeers here. He's not here, but hopefully he will hear us and see us online. So that's the way it started really for me. I'm a big vintage computer collector, specialized in Macintosh mostly. And my friend Bob, just about a year ago, July 2020, sent me this short email. Hey, Bruno, I thought you might be interested in this Craigslist cache of old computers and parts. Unfortunately, I didn't keep a copy of this Craigslist ad, but it was, a giant storage box full of boxes, an estate from a computer pioneer from the Bay Area, Chuck Koby. And to be honest, I didn't know of him. I didn't know of his company, so I kind of looked a little bit online and, a cursory research. I first found this YouTube video, and I'll talk some more about this. And actually, the YouTube video is on, looping on a monitor in our booth over there. But it's at least an hour of video by Chuck Koby himself, taped in 2016, and showing off, his life worth of technology product. And of course, we're here to talk more about those products, a wide range of technology products that Chuck was involved with. And by the way, Dan knows Chuck firsthand and actually worked with Chuck, and that's why Dan is here with us. Wikipedia entry hasn't been updated in a while. Actually, it's on our to-do list now that we know so much about Chuck's life to revamp a little bit about the Wikipedia page. Also, the Wikipedia page says that Chuck Koby invented, a list of maybe 60 products, which clearly, he might have worked on them and invented some of them, but it probably went a bit too far in claiming invention of a lot of products. Digibarn, and actually Dan was also involved in inviting Chuck at the Digibarn up in the Santa Cruz Mountains here back in 2003, and Digibarn did a great job at documenting all this. So already there, a good source of information about Chuck Koby. And then finally, we found a few pictures of WalkMax, which was one of the products that he made that we have some on display here. And I thought actually those WalkMax looked really cool and really nice. So I said, hey, that's cool. I'm interested in this cache of old products. And so I called the owner, the Craigslist poster, and he said, of course, yeah, come up tomorrow, I'll show it to you. And I really was not necessarily interested in buying the whole thing, but that's what he wanted to do. So this is Steve. Unfortunately, it's not the best photo. You'll see a better photo later on, but that's the only photo I had of Steve at the storage unit. And so that's Steve opening the storage unit in actually very near the Costco in Mountain View. And it was just full of boxes, over 400 of them. And there was a little line of sight. You could have a little hallway you could walk between the boxes. Thank God there was no earthquake when that happened. Otherwise, we would have been buried in those boxes. And by the way, it was very hot. And this is when the fires started. So most of the time, it was smoky. And sometimes we could see the rats at, at nighttime coming and walking on the little passageway where the cables would sit on top. So that was an interesting event. So, then I found these two guys. So this is Boris, the guy here, and then Steph. And they were there just like me, vintage Mac enthusiasts, also interested like me in finding out what was in those boxes. And again, Steve, the owner, didn't really want to open many boxes, just wanted to sell the whole thing to us. And clearly the price he was talking about was really not something we were willing to pay. So I think one of us, I think it was Steph, Boris, correct me if I'm wrong, but Steph then suggested that, hey, we can help you. We can spend as much time as needed to sort through all those boxes, find out if there's anything interesting, sending it aside and, creating a little catalog, a list of things that we found. Steve, the owner, was convinced we'd find an Apple I or maybe even two Apple Is. And so we were a bit intrigued by this. And Steve said, yes, let's do this. So we spent the next 3 days, Boris, sorting through the boxes, our hands full of rat feces and all kind of dust and stuff you wouldn't believe we saw. And we started to put stuff outside. So there was outside of the storage room. This was, I think it was the first day, because eventually we had to, so Steve, the owner, had to rent another empty storage space so we could put the good stuff in there. So that was our goal, really, to isolate, identify, and catalog the good stuff. And then that was our deliverable to Steve. And then further than that, I said to myself, well, I have time. I had just retired then. And I love, fixing stuff, tinkering with stuff. And I've fixed so many Macintosh. My wife could tell you stories about, Macintosh piling up in all storage rooms in my house. So I suggested to Steve, the owner, that I could actually take some of those good stuff and try to first clean them and then try to repair them and then try to sell, whatever was sellable. And he accepted. So that's what I did. And then in the meantime, Boris and Steph, kept doing a lot of research. Boris, the chief archival researcher, found a lot of documents that helped us understand the business, the man, and the line of products. And that's what we did for the last year or so. And it was a very interesting journey. And then in the meantime, then we met Mike, and Mike will tell you how he was involved in this. And again, Dan, who we quickly find out, knew Chuck from the DigiBarn event, and got in touch with him, and he was a great supporter of what we did as well. So, and so we learned so much about Chuck that we got involved into really having almost a connection with him. So Chuck passed away 2018, and all of that stuff was actually stuff that his widow had put in a storage container in the driveway of his house in Palo Alto. Beautiful house on Alexis Drive in the hills. And so it turned out that the owner of all this had bought the house and found this storage container with it. And he's not a techie, so he doesn't have any idea of what is what. And that's why the connection with us was good, because we helped him really try to understand and perhaps monetize some of that stuff. So he found himself with these 400 boxes, and so that's what we did. So again, through the course of this, we cataloged his life. So he was born in 1942, and he worked at Ampex for over 10 years in the 60s. And that's when he started, at the end of that, in the 70s and early 80s. He got the bug, the entrepreneurial bug, and started a couple of companies. But the most interesting part for us, at least in this vintage computer forum, was the last part, the Colby computer part. But since his life as a whole is interesting, I thought I'll go through some of the stuff he did before starting the Colby computer venture. So when he was young, he was kind of a Wozniak as a personality. He was a child prodigy. When he was 12 years old, he made a very early pocket transistor. Just at the time, transistor, at least in this country, Texas Instruments started to make transistors and sell them. When he was 16 years old, he won, I think, in Fresno. He lived in Fresno at the time. He won a Central Valley-wide science contest with a satellite receiver, which he claimed captured Sputnik signals. And when he was 20 years old, there was a news article in the Fresno Bee talking about his skills at ham TV. So then started to get a job. So he graduated from Fresno State, I think, in electronics, and he started to work at Ampex. He worked on some satellite television, complete turnkey TV studio and transmitter facility for a TV station in Sacramento. We found him posing with a beautiful Ampex TV camera. And he actually wrote a paper in '72 on the design, construction, and operation of a mobile television production van. Sole author of this paper. Then he started Executive Systems Incorporated, doing a few interesting things. Cassette rewinder, and actually we have a prototype of that at the booth over there. A paging center, wireless paging system, and a communication center, the ultimate in hostage negotiation. So I really don't know how many, what the size of the market for this, but that's what he did. Then he went on to satellite television. There was this San Francisco Examiner news article in 1980 about himself, from hot tubs to Earth stations. If you have $10,000 to $30,000 to spend to burning in your pocket, you can get in, take one of those antennas with over 20 channels. Can you imagine 20 channels for $30,000? He actually installed a system at the Lucasfilm Skywalker Ranch in Marin County, or at least he was asked to bid for one by Lucasfilm. And he's actually quoted by Steve Wozniak. He was actually a friend of Steve's. He's quoted in the book I Was. So Voss says that through a friend, Chuck Colby, who was building custom dishes for people, he got one built in his house in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And this is when he realized that there were remote controls everywhere, and apparently that gave him the impetus to create his company CL9, which he created after he left Apple, trying to do universal remote control systems. And by the way, Steve Voss, he's quoted as sending this email, very nice email, to Chuck in 2013. Chuck, you are the greatest inventor I know. I'd gladly trade places, and I hope you get more and more recognition. So this was forwarded to us by Steve Cooper, who was the owner of these boxes. And Steve Cooper actually got to know Chuck Colby before he passed away. And so Chuck Colby and Steve Cooper, the owner of these boxes, this real estate guy, actually were fairly good friends, and he forwarded this to me. So I have to say, knowing more and more of Chuck Colby's life and reading a lot of the, Steve Wozniak's life, I have to say that there's a lot of similarities between the two. And if I can say that, as much as Steve Wozniak, became the name he is because he got this, synergy with Steve Jobs on the business side. Unfortunately, I think Chuck Colby, who probably was as prolific and inventive as Wozniak, didn't get the chance to work with somebody like Steve Jobs, who could really, get to the next level and in the business side. So I'd say Chuck Colby is almost like a Wozniak without a Jobs, really. So then he went on to start the company Colby Computer. So that was the very early stages of personal computing. I think IBM came out with the design of the IBM PC that they put in the public domain in 1981. So that was right there. And so the first thing that Colby did was, hey, I'm going to get into the business and create my own motherboard. So that was a Colby motherboard, IBM compatible, that he made. selling for $369. So this is Kobe himself at the GD Marne in 2003, the event that Dan organized. And we actually did find one of those motherboards into a Kobe computer, PC compatible. You can see Kobe's logo here. I don't know if my mouse that doesn't work. So anyway, so we find this in all the boxes, and this was acquired by a collector in Canada. And then he went to, so portability was really the name of the game for Kobe for a lot of his career. And so the thing he really wanted was to make computers that were portable. And this was the Colby PC, how to carry your IBM PC for miles without moving it an inch. And so he took all the components of your regular standard desktop and then put them in a package that was semi-portable. So there was a big heavy handle. We actually have one similar to this in our booth. He claimed that could actually fit under an airline seat, so you could take it with you and don't have to check into the the luggage compartment. So that was the goal. And by the way, you might notice the red rose there. That was the IBM PC marketing program in the early 80s used a red rose, right? So that was a little nod to the IBM PC marketing campaign. So that's some photos we found in the estate. So that's Kobe in his own house with a bunch of Kobe PCs on the left. So I still don't know who are the other two people there, but I'm in touch with Kobe's widow, Karen Kobe, a great wife, great woman. I asked her a couple of days ago, I said, hey, can you help me identify these two people? She thinks the guy on the right-hand side is you, Dan. She said, I think it's Dan Kottke. Is that you? No.
I never had a hoodie in those days.
So I didn't think so either, but I thought I'd ask you. And then she thought the guy in the middle was Nolan Bushnell, who Kobe knew very well. Can anybody recognize Nolan Bushnell here? I don't think it was either.
No, it's definitely not Nolan.
Yeah.
It does look familiar.
Okay. So anyhow, yeah, if you have any hints of who these people are, go see me at the booth later today or tomorrow. And that's Kobe, and I think this is Kobe's first wife, Carol, but I could be wrong. At a trade show at the time where everybody wore, three-piece suits at trade shows with with ties. And I was one of his, early trade shows. And again, you can see the Kobe PC with the rose, the red rose was kind of cool. And I have to say, unfortunately, over, the stuff that always comes back over and over again with this product is that they didn't sell very much. Even though, they were great, they were fun, they looked good, they didn't sell very well. And so that's really unfortunately, the common denominator to all this is, hey, it's great, but it didn't sell. So he tried to, make it accessible and make it, something that the Army could be interested in. So he had a lot of connection with the Army. We found letters from the Army interested in the product. He even had, photo shoots with people who looked like soldiers carrying this Kobe PC with them. So we thought it was pretty cool. And then he moved on from the IBM compatible to the Mac. And I was just at the time where Apple came out with the first Macintosh, the Mac 128K, 1984. And so Kobe thought perhaps it would be a better angle to get people to buy his product by making it Apple product as opposed to IBM. The thing is, Apple didn't let Kobe at the time, buy logic boards for cheap, or even let him, copy the BIOS. So that was a conversion machine. It was not a clone. That was not a Macintosh clone. That was what's called a Macintosh conversion machine. So people would have to buy the Mac itself. And so he actually, when you buy the kit, he would give you a Betamax video that has instructions on how to take apart a Macintosh, take the logic board, take the analog board, and then put it in a Kobe kit. So needless to say, the added cost of this was tremendous. It was a cute little machine, and it's on display over there. We actually have one that's working. But again, it didn't sell very much. So we have here and there, collectors who come to us and say, hey, I have one, or I'd like one. So it's a product that's sold, but really not greatly.
Makes you wonder if he offered the same warranty coverage as Apple.
That's a good question.
Right? Because he voided Apple's warranty.
Right. Yeah, good question. So anyway, so we found one in the storage, badly, full, anyway, there was a lot of work to fix and clean up. And that's our Mac Kobe after restoration. Actually, I acquired it for my own collection, and it's on display here, and it's working quite well. And again, actually, this one works off a 512, Macintosh 512K, not the 120K. Beautiful little machine. And what he did was actually to use the two. There's room in a 128K and a 512K. There's room for two floppy drives, one internal and one external. So he tricked the system thinking there was two internal drives. And that actually worked better than the 128 and the 512 and the Mac Plus, which only have one internal floppies. So that's the one plus, that, no pun intended, one advantage compared to the Macintosh. So I have a slide on whether Kobe and Apple were friends or foes. So clearly, Kobe wanted to have a relationship with Apple. And there's a letter. He actually sold a couple of his Mac Kobe's to Apple. And there's a letter from John Scully saying, hey, thanks for selling two Mac Kobe's to us. And I'm sending those two Macintosh to you to take apart and rebuild the Mac Kobe. So that was interesting. That was in '84. So it's Dear Chuck. It's not Dear Mr. Colby or something. So there was some friendship between the two. We found actually evidence of a business meeting between Kobe and some Apple people, Steve Jobs, and about 12 business cards we found from business people as well as R&D people. Steve Jobs' card is actually annotated in the back with Kobe himself, and Kobe wrote, has Mac Kobe on his desk. And by the way, so these cards will be sold at an auction next week in R&R auctions, and R&R is actually here. They actually, we communicated with them. They've been very good connection with us, and they're going to go ahead and sell these cards for the owner, Steve Cooper. So there was evidence of a meeting, whether or not they decided to be able to get parts from Apple, to buy the logic boards for cheap, have some business agreement, we don't know. We further found that in '86, a journal article where Colby says that whether or not an agreement between Apple and Colby is reached, the Colby Lap Mac computer will be on the market. So that means in '86 at least, there was still no agreement. And then in '87, now Scully is quoted down there, that Scully is quoted as saying, well, we haven't decided about selling boards, but we haven't ruled it out, and it's not a religious issue. So that seemed that perhaps Scully at the time was open to at least selling boards to Kobe for Kobe to sell his portable systems. So that tells us that perhaps somewhere around '87 there was a change from we don't want to sell any components to you to, hey, we'll perhaps sell the boards and the BIOS, the ROMs to you. That's just my guess. But it kind of makes sense when you look at the, the product lineup. By the way, so this is, again, '86 or '87, based off the Mac Plus. Kobe came with a mobile Mac, which he wanted to sell to law enforcement to put in police cars. And he had a photo shoot with the Redwood City Police Department, which we have a bunch of photos of that photo shoot, which is kind of cute. I think there's even one with a police officer smoking a cigarette in the car. That's what. There it is. Yeah, he's smoking cigarettes. Yeah, on this. So we found this system, which was acquired by Tom Howard, the owner of applefritter.com, a forum and a big collector of Apple stuff, and he acquired it. Then comes the flat display, and the first one was the Lat Mac, based off a Mac Plus motherboard, circa 86, 87. Beautiful little machine, so we have one on display. And that's the one here that, again, was really dirty, and we cleaned it up. This one is still not in working order, but it's at least nice and clean. Cute little machine. Then he went on to the brand name WalkMac. So WalkMac clearly was a nod to Sony, right? Walkman, and I think he got in trouble with Sony, who probably issued a cease and desist order, because at some point he changed the name from WalkMac to Colby. So he might have had a problem with them. So beautiful little machine with a plasma display. We also have, if you look at the photos, there's a little printer. We have the printer on display as well. Actually, it turned out the printer is a Kodak printer with a Colby sticker on it. Yeah, cute little machine. And this is tell you what, the shape of some of the pieces of hardware we found. Not pretty, but we got them clean and working. And we actually had two of them. And one of them was acquired by an Apple museum in Poland. So the Apple Museum in Warsaw, Poland, acquired one. And it's on their website. So that's the one on the left or on the right, I forgot, but that's our Colby computer, WalkMac. That's now sitting in the Apple Museum in Warsaw, so that's pretty cool. Colby also made Tempest qualified WalkMacs destined to the military again. Tempest is a set of specifications that you have to pass in order to be certified for the Army. And so it has to be electromagnetic proof and things of that nature. So this has a very thick aluminum shell and also removable hard drive and floppy drives. Again, I'm not sure he sold many of them. We had actually 4 of them that we found in the storage, which all 4 of them were able to fix. They have a cute little mouse pad at the top, and this beautiful plasma display. By the way, the plasma display was from a company in Japan called Dixie, which I'm not sure still exists or not. So we sold 2 of them, one to a collector in the Bay Area, who is an Apple employee, and one again went to Pennsylvania at the applefritter.com collector. And one of them I'm about to donate to the Computer History Museum here. So then this is more something we recognize, right? This is a laptop that we say, oh yeah, that I know this. So that's the WalkMac SE series. So now it moves on to the SE logic board, again the Mac logic board, and this is when we think perhaps he had a business agreement with Apple because he was able to sell these as is, not as a kit. So he was able to procure the logic board from Apple and the BIOS. And that was the WalkMac SE, which came in several flavors, the SE30, SE40, etc. And Boris can tell you some more about this. Boris actually owns one. And I think these were based off a TFT screen, not plasma. So we found, this is some nice marketing about it. And price list, base model, $5,500. I think the SE costs about $3,000 at the same time, so quite a bit more. And this was just the base model. If you wanted a hard drive, you had to pay $1,000 more than this. And that's an SE we found, not in working order. Actually, it was missing quite a bit of stuff in there. And again, that was acquired by the applefritter.com owner in Pennsylvania. A bunch of portables, which I'm not sure sold any. There was a mini walk Mac, a Kobe Stealth, beautiful artwork, a classmate. And by the way, so this is Karen Colby, so Colby's second wife, on a flight to Hawaii. So this is featured in the video, the YouTube video, the Kobe Museum YouTube video, where Colby goes on to say, well, it was 1985, which actually doesn't make too much sense, because I don't think the plasma displays were available there, but that's what he says. And using a plasma display with a portable computer running Macintosh, and I have to believe that this was the very first event of somebody using a Macintosh laptop on a flight ever. So this is, historical, I guess. And Karen, whom I'm communicating with, confirmed that. Some beautiful product concept, which probably never came to the fore, but I thought those designs were beautiful. I'm trying to track down the artist who did them, and I'm still haven't been able to find him or her. Miss Sores was his or her name, but I thought those prints are just gorgeous, and many of them are on display at our booth. And then, so Kobe then quit the PC, the personal computing stuff, went into a lot of products ahead of his time. Really, he was in DVR before TiVo and other people did that. He sold a huge system to the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas. He was big into MPEG-2 and DVRs. We see him in trade shows in the year 2000s, touting his DVRs. He, before he was fashionable, he worked on drones, and Dan has interesting stories to tell about that. Video robots, e-bikes, e-scooters. Again, before it was a thing. And Dan will tell you a lot more about some of the product concept he worked before anybody else. So last couple of slides, Kobe's CRM system computer was CRM computer something management? Relationship management. Relation management. So Kobe didn't have a system. His system were notes, post-it notes, and notes written on the little pad in the hotel room. So that was his management. And then some packing slips that we found, and look at this one. So we actually, he packed the system, sent it to Philippe Kahn, CEO of Borland. So once in a while, we find names of people we know in all the paperwork. And there were hundreds and hundreds of those little notes everywhere. And, flat Mac interest. So this guy had an interest in a flat Mac. And it was Colby's lab book. Dan, first time I met Dan said, hey, did you find a lab book? And the answer was no. No, we didn't find a lab book. This was the lab book, a set of 3 pages in Manila folders everywhere. And on the left is a plasma display interface, which is what he used in the Walk Macs. On the right is something that he worked on, an EKG remote transmitter. So all this was actually acquired by Tom Howard in the plasma fritter collector. So my last slide is this one. So in the Kobe Museum video, by the way, the Kobe Museum video was actually made by the Library of Congress. So back in 2016, the Library of Congress was interested in making oral history or video history of some of the key players in many industries, including Silicon Valley. So they actually went to Kobe's house, and this is when Kobe showed off his museum. And by the way, I tried to track down this video at the Library of Congress, and I just couldn't find it. So I sent them an email, hey, do you have any trace of this? And they just couldn't find it. So anyway, it's another story. So Kobe on his dining room had this beautiful artwork, which I tracked down as coming from the 70s, mid-70s. Actually, a textile company in Sweden was big into this, mid-century modern type of pattern. And Kobe had one of those frames in his dining room. And he goes on to say that it was actually the inspiration for the Apple rainbow logo. And if you look at the Apple rainbow logo, it's actually not very different. Kobe had it upside down. What Kobe said is that he had a since he was a friend of Wozniak's, he had Woz sitting with him in the dining room one day in 75 or 76. And then they were looking at, they were discussing that, the fact that Apple needed a new logo. The first Apple logo was not great. It was black and white, Newton under a tree, etc. So apparently they were discussing with Wozniak about the need for a new logo. And then apparently what Chuck says is that Wozniak looked at this and say, hey, perhaps we can do something of that nature. So Chuck says that Steve Jobs sent somebody to buy, another copy of this artwork, textile, and this is how the Apple logo started. So I'm trying to either confirm or disprove the story, and I've got, some yeses and some no's. Maybe some more no's than yeses, but I'm still tracking down, and it's an interesting story by itself, which perhaps could be a topic for next year's VCF meeting. So with this, I'll let Mike tell how I was involved with this.
Thanks, Bruno. My name is Mike, and vintage computer enthusiast. I've got a pretty simple but fun story it's really about giving back from Colby to the community. So how I started, I liked to look at a Craigslist ad, and a Craigslist ad was for a whole storage bin to the top, just full of Colby items. All the Walkmacks were taken out of, but there's still a lot left. So I went and visited this large, space, and boxes up to the ceiling. Some of them tilting over. Obviously, rats were involved. There's actually a storage shed and half full of stuff. And I looked at it and said, wow, this is great. We should share this with the community. There's no way I could take this or my wife would let me to have any of this stuff. So I met with Bruno, and I suggested to Bruno, and ultimately I got a gentleman named Steve, let's take this and share it back to the vintage computing community and the community at large. Let's have an estate sale and put it all out for everyone to enjoy. The challenge was in the middle of COVID, it was before the vaccines, and so we decided to do it in a very safe way where we kind of had allotted only a certain amount of people per time. And so I carried everything from that storage shed to my driveway, and we then laid it all out. And this is kind of what it looked at. It was just more than an individual person could go through. Down the driveway, it was just boxes and boxes of stuff. There was magazines, old paperwork. A lot of times he did product development. He had bits, parts, and pieces in the boxes. There were individual electronic parts. Everything goes that was part of this. And there was a lot of exploring to go. So you had to dig through the boxes. Sometimes you'd find stuff at the very bottom in terms of what we'd find. But this is we started out, I think it was 9 in the morning, laid it all the way out. Again, we didn't really know what everything was in there, and that was kind of half the fun. What we decided to do to give back, we said we put it $20 per bag, and you can get whatever you want and take it away. And that way, just to make it really easy, real fun. And I think it's if it was a box full of just paperwork, I think it was like $1 or $2, something like that. Just made it really easy for the community. And what really made it fun was people finding kind of different electronic treasures in the estate sale. This actually was later in the day after a lot of people already went through this. Someone went to the very bottom of a box and found an old Mac motherboard that was some part of development. There were still wires going left and right direction, and people were looking over it and trying to decide exactly how Colby was using this individual piece that they found in there. And this happened over and over. There was another instance where somebody who was collecting keyboards. I don't know, I'm not sure why, but they collected all these keyboards from all different boxes and bought a dozen or 2 different keyboards. And a lot of the fun was just some of the stories of how some of the Colby stuff was actually given back to the community. My favorite one was one second from the bottom was this mother came by. She says, I've got this 17-year-old kid, has cancer, but this kid just loves to fiddle with gear. And so she bought some of just really strange looking, weird stuff, warehouse type of gear, and put it in a box and got $20 a box. Says, I got this for my kid, he's gonna love this. Which is a great story. There was another guy who was taking very strange electronic stuff with transformers and stuff, and I asked him what he was doing. He says, yeah, I'm a musician, and I feed this from my synthesizer. Not sure exactly how he does it, and this is how I make my music. And so he took a box of all the stuff he was going to make music. Another lady came by, another odd assortment of stuff. Says, I'm an artist. I'm putting this stuff on my art. There's another gentleman who wanted to make a computer by themselves and bought a display and a case and a few other miscellaneous parts and was going to make a computer. And I think this was the essence of taking what Chuck's legacy, and rather than it going to a landfill or going out to sell in the higher bid, just give it out. And all the Colby's estate stuff, and he didn't throw stuff away. And there was like 400 boxes on my driveway. It gave out to so many different people, which made a lot of fun. There's also a lot of strange things within there. Some stuff I never know what it was. Like the stuff in the middle was, we used to be a light and they put a camera on it. It was probably for some demo. The top right, you can't really tell, but this was for some type of, I think, police conference or something, but it had laser beams and lights and sensors and it would rotate. It was, we were still trying to figure out what it was, but this was in the bottom of the box. Early in his, I think, inventing, he created, I think it was a novelty item called the computer and a couple other things. If you go in there, it took 12 9-volt batteries to power the thing. I was a little afraid actually to plug it all in right now, but he had I think, a sense of humor, but it was just a lot of product development sides there. Anyway, lots of really fun things.
You have to read the bottom right. The audience can't read it. It says, it's got 8 blinking lights. It says, semi-phased, electronic, bistable, now for Trunnion.
I actually had to Google that to make sure it wasn't something real. It's not. So towards the tail end of the estate sale, we had gotten rid of all electronics, but there was probably over 100 to 150 boxes of paperwork. And it was all about, through his whole career, stuff that he did to design, and a lot of interesting history in there. And some of the stuff we sold, but honestly, I didn't know what to do with it. Foon, some of you may know him. He's I think well-known on Twitter and a few other things. Came and he said, "Oh my God, this is internet history. We can't let this go into the landfill and recycling." And so he took all the paperwork and said, "Let's preserve this in the Internet Archive." And so he put out a help signal on Twitter. This was about the end of the first day of our estate sale, and said, "You know what? I'm going to go get a U-Haul truck, and I need about 5 other people to help me carry these 100 boxes and put it in my U-Haul so I can take it to the Internet Archive." And Bruno and I were like, "Really? Is this really going to happen?" And it ended up the next morning, he showed up bright and early in the morning. His crew showed up and saved all his paperwork. And it's currently in an Internet Archive. It's right now not done anything because all the people who scan this stuff because of COVID. But I think in next year, all the stuff will be filtered, sorted, and ultimately digitized. And so it'll be a nice historical record for the future. With that, I think we have, towards the end of the show, take a picture of Bruno, Dan, and I at the very end. That's in the story. Back to you.
What I'll do is I'll acknowledge. I have a bunch of people I'd like to acknowledge, and then I'll let you then. So yeah, just want to make sure that I acknowledge, a lot of people. So of course, Boris and Steph, my 2 companions in crime. Actually, Steve called us the Kobe Amigos, so we're now forever being called the Kobe Amigos. So this is Steve Cooper, the owner of the house and the one who got it all started. So Paul Stephan, so he's a friend of Chuck Colby's. He's the one that Colby's asked to post the video, the Library of Congress video, which never was a Library of Congress video, on YouTube. So he's the one who actually preserved this again for the community, and cannot thank him more. Enough for what he did, because without that video, we might not be here today. So, kudos to him, and he's been helping me. Also, he might help us actually, continue the documentation of the Wikipedia page as well. So, great friend. I went to speak to Vicky Dempsey. She was the neighbor of the Colbys in Palo Alto, very friendly woman, had a great chat. Clay Maynard, who is a good friend of Chuck Colby's. He's actually on the video himself in the backyard, and I spoke to him, very friendly guy. Of course, Karen Colby, a great woman. She's in Fresno in a retirement home. She's been very helpful. Whenever I have a question, I shoot her an email, and she always replies very quickly. A great woman. I want to acknowledge VCF, of course, CHM, of course, DigiBarn, and they invited us, actually, thanks to Dan the other day, last week. We had a whole afternoon at the DigiBarn. They were great. But again, it really helped that they had that meeting in 2003 with Chuck Kobe and posted a lot of photos and a lot of comments about that meeting that really helped us understand and learn about Kobe's life. Internet Archive, we actually found a lot of good, press articles, news, you name it. We found so much stuff, and it was mostly Boris doing this, and kudos to this. The 68K forum that really helped me whenever I have a problem fixing stuff. I post my a new thread on the forum, and always people are very friendly to help us, fixing old Macs. Library of Congress, so I was in touch with them. They actually tried very hard to find those videos. They did not, but the people I spoke to were very friendly, so thanks to them. Apple Fritter, so Tom Howard, the owner of that, also has his forum on Mac vintage stuff. Very nice guy who now has acquired quite a bit of this Kobe estate. And then the Apple Museum with a Z in Poland. This vintagecomputer.ca, the Canadian vintage collector, who also acquired quite a few of these pieces. Bob Rosenblum, he was here today. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it today, but he's also a big collector up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, very friendly guy. And he acquired actually one of the Ampex tape video recording system that we found in the estate. So yeah, so that's been a really friendly, nice 1 year of research and restoration project. But all this is really, for Chuck himself, what we wanted to do was not only to repair and bring to life some of the pieces of hardware, but also hopefully create a legacy to Chuck, which he clearly deserves. And with him, with this, I'll let Dan then talk a little bit about what he knows of Chuck.
I didn't bring a slideshow. If this mic works, I can just talk from here. What do you think? Should I go up to the podium? Well, I can't remember when I first met Chuck, but I used to see him at conferences, all types of conferences, because he had many interests. And now as I think back, I must not have known him when he was doing the Walk Mac or his various Mac things, because I would have helped him, and he didn't ever reach out to me for help with that. So it was after that when I met him. And I was kind of amazed when I saw what he had done. Before I forget, there's an anecdote he told me once, very early in his career. Somehow he got himself attached to the set of the Elvis Presley movie Blue Hawaii. And he said he was on the set in Hawaii, met Elvis Presley, and that was a big deal for him because he was still early in his career. But I went and looked up he's not in the credits. Well, he kind of was implying that maybe he was an extra or he was in one of the scenes, but he wasn't credited. Anyway, gosh, let's see. I made a little list of things. Well, so attaché case video modem, that was the earliest thing that I knew he had worked on. And I didn't know any of his history. This was, before Wikipedia, so I didn't have an easy way to look up his history. But I just saw today he worked for 11 years at Ampex. That is a long time. And I watched 2 videos on YouTube about the creation of the VT100, which Ampex was famous for, and that was such a huge effort. That was a fascinating story, which Chuck was not part of, but he worked on the 3000, which was either the second, maybe the third generation. I think the first generation was immense. But it completely revolutionized the television industry because prior to that, they had to use a film camera to record a television show, obviously. And that was really fascinating history. So that's how I think he got started with video. Of course, that's how he got started with video. And Woz was famous for his satellite dish, and it's not well known that Woz was living in the Los Gatos Hills. I didn't know that it was I used to go to parties at Woz's house. I didn't know it was a Colby dish. I think I knew Colby by then, but Woz got himself in trouble because he had paid all this money for the Colby satellite receiver system, and then he ran the coax down his street and offered it free to all his neighbors. And that didn't sit well with the Comcast, I guess, or whoever. He got a cease and desist order. That's Woz for you. Let's see, what's next on the list here? So he did. I had no idea he had done so many versions of the Macintosh, and I didn't know he had done the PC prior to that. That was all fascinating. My main collaboration, my earliest collaboration with Chuck, in the early 90s, I was an embedded engineer. Well, it's a complicated story, but I was making little scrolling message displays with a one-chip controller with LED matrix displays. And I wanted to offer it as a programmable thing, but serial ports were just so difficult in software, especially in Windows. And I did eventually make a USB version 10 years later, but Chuck loved my scrolling message thing because it was small and it had many uses. And I gave him my circuit schematic, and he designed his own version that was even smaller. And I actually found the circuit board. Here it is. It was so here's the circuit board that Chuck built. And Chuck was remarkable as an engineer because he did the electrical engineering and he also did his own PC layout. So here's a board that it's quite dense. Chuck laid out the whole board. Unfortunately, he didn't take the trouble to do an assembly diagram. So he gave me these boards and said, see if you can make this work. And he wasn't paying me. Or maybe I don't know. I didn't mind. So then I did get this board to work. It was only 3 digits, so it wasn't that useful. But I found out later that what he shared with me was his vision was to take this scrolling message display and embed it in the red light of a traffic light. So when you're sitting at a traffic light, you'll be getting these scrolling text messages, which is just the type of wacky creative idea that he had. Now, I don't think he made progress making that into a product, but that's just a funny anecdote. Anyway, I did not have a successful product. So I made many, many versions of these scrolling message displays. I made it so you could edit the message on the fly using buttons, but that was complicated for people to learn. The only anecdote I'll share is that years later, when Twitter started up, when was that? 2005, maybe, 2004. I was working with another guy, and we put a USB port on it, so that you could, and then we got someone to create an app, so you could just like copy and paste text and put it in the scrolling message display, as a $75 product. And I pitched it to Twitter, and they loved it. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm on my way as an entrepreneur, because the idea of taking tweets, back then they were just text. Nowadays, tweets are all video and links and stuff. But back then it was just text. And you could just copy the text, and you could copy a whole series of them and put them on this scrolling message display. And I had a lot of interest from bars that thought it would be entertaining to take singles ads and put them on a scrolling message display in the bar. Anyway, moving right along, so then, or maybe around the same time, Chuck went, he had come back from a trip to the Far East, and he had created his own tiny NTSC video camera, a standalone video camera that was 1 inch by 1 inch by 3/4 inch. And I didn't quite understand whether he was going to release it as a standalone product, which didn't really make that much sense. It would make sense for a body cam, I suppose. But what he showed me sometime later was this, which I thought was super creative, and I thought he would be successful. So what he did, this is a rear view mirror for a police car with 5 cameras on it, one facing back, one pointing to each side, and 2 facing front. And he had some, I think I saw paperwork that of the contacts, we saw all the business cards of his police. So Chuck was the guy who would just go to the policeman's conference and pitch people on these ideas. And he had a lot of interest, but I don't think he ever closed a deal on this. Because this was years before body cams. And this product idea had me thinking that what police departments ought to do, because the cost of a police car is cheap compared to the cost of an officer and an officer's time. And so Chuck and I had discussed the idea of taking his camera module and putting it on top of a police car and just parking it in troubled areas. I thought that was such a good idea. I've never seen anyone do that. Anyway. The theme, and then the next thing was Harn Soper, who's not here, but he was a very good friend of Chuck's going way back. And so now we're talking around 20 years ago. Harn worked very close to where I worked in Sunnyvale, and so we would meet for lunch. And Chuck took his camera and put a 360-degree super wide-angle lens on top of it, and the idea was for a security monitoring of apartment buildings. And I thought that was a great idea. I don't know how far he got. Did we ever see a prototype of that? Well, I saw prototypes. Anyway, another good idea. Okay, you're getting the idea of the theme here. Chuck was like Woz. And how successful would Woz have been as an entrepreneur? He would not have been successful. He did not have the right mindset to be an entrepreneur. And maybe, I don't know, Chuck liked giving demos. He was a pretty snazzy guy and he was charming, but he did need a Steve Jobs-like marketing character. And, I might have been willing to help him in that respect, but he never really asked me. But actually, the fact was, back then, I wanted to be a Woz inventor. So I was identifying with Chuck a lot. Anyway, so there was the roof security cam, the police car four-way rear view mirror, and then the next one that I worked quite a bit on him with was he came up with this idea for disabled people. It was a cane that had an ultrasonic ranging module and a vibrator in the handle. And I did the schematic for that and got it prototyped for him. And then so it was a cane, and wherever you point the cane, it would vibrate with strength based on the proximity of whatever it was pointed at, which seems like a good idea also. I remember at that time we had investor meetings. He had some wealthy guy who was kind of on deck, some guy from the East Coast. But I don't know, he never got the big purchase order. Which brings us to the other big theme of Chuck's life. I loved Chuck, but I always was curious to know what was financially successful for him. And he wouldn't really answer that question. And so then the final chapter was 2010. I invested in a big dormant resort project called Hoburg's Resort. And I was the engineer of that team, so I was into smart home stuff. And this is 2010, I read an article about a robo-concierge for a front desk for a place like a hotel, and immediately thought of Chuck. And because what I wanted was a telepresence tablet that would have a pan and tilt that would sit on a countertop so that you wouldn't need a live person at a front desk. And Chuck and I had many meetings about that. And at the time, so Chuck was, so when the Segway came out, Chuck immediately set to work building. He had maybe half a dozen different prototypes of little scooters, but he didn't do the Segway balancing act because that's very complicated. He just had a three-wheel. So I was over at his house a number of times. He would be demoing all his little scooters. And then he had a thing that was like a Segway, but with three wheels. And then he had an Apple iPad doing telepresence. And the application there is something that would go through a warehouse and do inventory using the telepresence. And his thing was $100. How much was the Segway? It was like $5,000. There are cheaper ones now, but the Segway was a huge disappointment. And I thought Chuck would be successful with that. And anyway, he was big into, so he and I went to robotics meetings, the Silicon Valley Robotics Association meetings. And well, I thought I would get into robotics, but I never quite did. And the last image I'll share with you is one of Chuck's scooters was built out of a cooler, like a plastic picnic cooler. And the image of Chuck sitting, he put a little seat on it. Chuck is sitting on this cooler with his little handlebars and scooting around his deck. I just thought that was hilarious. That was his personality. So anyway, I was, I don't know. Karen's a wonderful lady. She would make lunch for us. There was never an obituary for Chuck, which I found distressing and annoying because he stopped answering my calls back in 2015, and I never could get a hold of Karen, and I never knew what happened to him until the estate sale. That's a poignant story. I guess he didn't have a family member to do an obituary, and Karen wasn't quite up to it. So there's a moral of the story. Get your obituary done ahead of time. Anyway, I just wanted to join this panel to celebrate the spirit of Chuck's endlessly inventive spirit. It was a surprise to learn that he hadn't made more patent applications. I would have thought he had done that. But you know, in the early days at Apple, we weren't doing patents. We figured we didn't have time. It was just a rush to innovate and get something to market. And there wasn't, Chinese copycats looming over our shoulders. Anyway, Chuck was a hugely inventive person, and I hope that's been entertaining for you all.
Was the PC clone before or after the compact portable? Do you know?
I don't. Do you guys know?
I don't know either.
So PC clone, maybe 82, 83, so I don't know when compact came up with.
Compact was introduced at the end of 82 and shipped in, I think, March of 83.
Okay, so maybe same time, perhaps?
Probably same time. A second just comment was one of his logos looked an awful lot like the Osborne Computer Company, just when you showed it up there. One last point, to be quick. Was he here at, I think there was a reunion of the Homebrew Computer Club here in the museum 6, 8, 10 years ago? I mean, was anybody here?
Chuck was definitely a homebrew guy, and I
seem to remember him over in that corner.
Yeah, he was the kind of guy who would be standing in the back, but he was distinctive because of his white hair. He used to go to a lot of shows. I'd see him at SIGGRAPH and CES.
So the guy who posted the video on YouTube, Paul Stephan, he's also a homebrew guy, and he told me he met Chuck at the homebrew club.
Any other questions?
Oh,
I guess I'd try and revisit, did any of the Colby Macs ever seem to make much traction in the DoD at all, or is it one of those things they just looked at and never ended up buying any?
So the WalkMac Tempest, the one that's Tempest qualified, some of them we had or still have the property of the Army label on it, which maybe I'm not supposed to say, and that's all we know. I don't think he sold that many. They're probably, we did a lot of research online, find out, who owns a WalkMac, and there might be 2 of those type, the Tempest type. Quite a few of the WalkMac SE, the one that looks more like a laptop. But the earlier WalkMacs, I don't think he sold much at all.
Anyone else? I know it's getting late, and I was going to bring the cane out in about 5 minutes because you guys were going long. Any other questions? Well, you guys are going to be hanging around, some of you at least tomorrow, so if you see them around, they will look a little different. They'll have something on their face. But if you see them around, just, and have a question for them, I hope you guys don't mind if they just go ahead and ask.
Yeah, and stop by the booth, yeah.
Yeah, stop by the booth. It's right over here.